You reached for that blue and yellow can this morning, you sprayed a hinge, maybe a stubborn bolt, then you tossed it back in the drawer, and you have no idea what you were holding. Here is the truth that took me 30 years to understand. The same little can sitting in your garage right now can protect your home from the one thing that quietly destroys it faster than fire, faster than termites, faster than any storm, moisture. And the Amish families I came to know in Lancaster County figured that out decades before the chemists did. Stay with me, because near the end, I am going to show you a trick pulled straight out of a 1953 laboratory notebook in San Diego, a use so simple you can do it this weekend, and if you already own an older home, this matters to you more than anyone. The first time I watched an old Amish man in Holmes County, Ohio use this can on something I never expected, I actually laughed out loud. Then I stopped laughing. Because he was right, and I had been wrong for most of my life. Let me take you back to where this really started. Most folks think that can was invented to fix squeaky doors. It was not. It was invented to protect a nuclear missile. In 1953, in a tiny lab in San Diego, California, a fledgling outfit called the Rocket Chemical Company set out to build rust prevention solvents for the aerospace industry. There were only 3 of them. 3 men, a small room, and a single stubborn problem. They needed something that could stop rust and corrosion from eating the outer skin of the Atlas missile. It took them 40 tries. 40. They failed 39 times, and on the 40th attempt, they finally got the water displacing formula right. That is where the name comes from. Water displacement, 40th formula. WD-40, that name came straight out of the chemist's lab book. Now think about what that actually means, because nobody stops to think about it. The whole reason that product exists is to push water off metal, to drive moisture out of the tiniest cracks and hold it out. It was never really about lubrication. That was a happy accident. The real magic, the reason the military wanted it, was that it displaces water where water should never be. The formula worked so well on the Atlas missile that the workers at the aerospace contractor started sneaking cans out of the plant in their lunchboxes to take home. They were not supposed to. But they had seen what it did to metal, and they wanted it for their own tools, their own hinges, their own rusting problems. By 1958, the company started selling it in aerosol cans, and it flew off the shelves in San Diego. 7 employees were selling 45 cases a day out of the trunks of their cars. And here's a detail that stuck with me. In 1961, when Hurricane Carla tore up the Gulf Coast, the first full truckload of that product was rushed down to the disaster zone, not to lubricate anything, to recondition vehicles and machines that had been drowned in floodwater. They sprayed it on soaked engines and ruined equipment, and it pushed the water back out and brought dead machines back to life. A year later, in 1962, the Atlas rocket that carried John Glenn into orbit around the Earth carried the fingerprints of that same formula, from a missile to a hurricane to outer space. All because it does one thing better than almost anything else on Earth. It gets rid of water, and it kept going. In 1968, kits of that same product were shipped to soldiers in Vietnam so they could keep moisture from destroying their equipment in the jungle heat and the monsoon rains. Think about what that tells you. The military did not send it over there to make squeaky things quiet. They sent it because in a place where wet air ruins metal in days, this was the difference between gear that worked and gear that failed. In 1970, the Rocket Chemical Company changed its name to match its one famous product. In 1973, it went public on the stock market with just that single item to sell. One product, 300 employees, and it grew into something that today sells in more than 170 countries with a list of over 2,000 documented uses. 2,000. And I would bet you every dollar in my pocket that you use, maybe 2 of them. That gap between 2,000 uses and the 2 you actually know is exactly what this whole video is about. Because somewhere along the way, we were quietly trained to forget almost everything that can could do. But here is the question that changed everything for me. If this stuff was built to save missiles and machines from moisture, why is the only thing most of us ever do with it spray a squeaky door and forget about it? That is exactly the gap the Amish never fell into. Because in Amish country, they do not think about moisture the way you and I were taught to. We were taught to fight water with big systems. dehumidifiers that run on electricity, sealants that cost a fortune, contractors who show up, shake their heads, and hand you a bill. The Amish think about moisture the way those three chemists did in 1953. Push it off the metal, keep it off the metal, and you have solved a problem before it ever becomes a disaster. Let me show you what that looks like in a real house. The first hack is the one that old man in Holmes County showed me, and it is the one that made me laugh before it made me a believer. He took a can and he went around to every door hinge, every gate latch, every metal fastener that lived outdoors or near a window, but he did not just spray them. He wiped them down first, dried them completely, and then laid down a thin coat and worked it in. He was not lubricating. He was sealing water out of the metal. Those hinges on his barn were older than I was, and there was not a speck of rust on a single one. Now compare that to the tools rusting in your garage right now. Here is something most people get exactly backwards, and I did too. A quick spray and walk away does almost nothing for long-term rust protection because you left the moisture underneath it. The trick the old-timers used, the one that traces right back to that missile skin in 1953, is that you have to displace the water first, dry the surface, and then apply your protective film onto clean, dry metal. Do it that way. And a garden shovel, a set of pliers, a handsaw will sit through an entire damp winter and come out in spring looking like the day you bought it. Which brings me to the second hack, and this one saved me real money. Every fall, before the cold set in, I watched an Amish family coat the metal parts of everything that would sit idle through winter. The mower blades, the hand tools, the hinges on the root cellar, the moving parts of the old hand crank equipment. They understood that a machine does not usually die from being used. It dies from sitting still while moisture eats it from the inside out. A $3 coating in October saved them from a $300 repair in April. Do that math across a lifetime of tools, and you understand why these people do not replace things every few years like the rest of us. I want you to really sit with that number for a second, because it is the heart of everything. $3 against $300, that is 100 to 1. Now spread that across every metal thing you own. The tools in your garage, the mower, the trimmer, the wheelbarrow, the hinges, the hand tools your father left you. If you replace even one of those a year because it rusted out, you have spent more in a decade than an entire lifetime of preventive coating would ever cost. The Amish are not cheap. I want to be clear about that. They are careful. There is a difference, and the difference is knowledge. They know exactly what destroys a thing, and they get in front of it before it starts. We wait until the thing is ruined, then we pay full price to replace it, and we call that normal. And there is a third hack hiding inside the second one that took me years to notice. It is not just the metal parts that matter, it is the wooden handles too. On a rake, a shovel, an axe, the place where the metal head meets the wooden handle is where water sneaks in, swells the wood, loosens the head, and cracks the whole thing apart. The old-timers would work a little of that oil right into that joint, driving the moisture out of the seam and keeping the wood from swelling and splitting. A tool head that stays tight is a tool that lasts 3 generations. A loose one is an accident waiting to happen and a trip to the store you did not need to make. But therefore, if this simple idea can protect a shovel, ask yourself what else in your home is quietly rusting where you cannot even see it. That question takes us somewhere most people never look. Your locks, your window tracks, the strike plates inside your door frames, the metal parts of your storm windows. Every one of those is a place where moisture creeps in, freezes, expands, and slowly destroys the mechanism. An Amish woman in Lancaster showed me how she kept every lock and latch in the house working smooth for decades. Twice a year, she cleaned them out, displaced the moisture, and laid down a whisper-thin protective film. Not a soaking, a whisper. Because too much attracts dust and grime, and the old-timers knew that better than anyone. And that is the part the modern instructions get wrong. They tell you to drown everything. The traditional way, the way that actually preserves things for 50 years, is restraint. A little worked in well on clean, dry metal. That is the whole secret. And it is the exact opposite of how most Americans use that can. Now, before I go any further, I want to be honest with you about something, because I promised you the truth and not a sales pitch. What I am sharing here is only one corner of a much larger body of knowledge. Everything I learned in those years around Amish families, room by room, the heating tricks, the cooling tricks, the way they run a pantry without electricity, the way they keep pests out without poison, the off-grid systems that just work, my team gathered all of it into one place called the Complete Amish Home System, and there is a special limited time offer on it right now. You will find it linked in the description, and you can scan the QR code on your screen, because the handful of tricks in this video are just a single taste of the buried archive that most people will never get their hands on. Now, let me get back to what really matters, because the next part is where things start to get uncomfortable. Here is what nobody wanted you to figure out. If a $3 can, applied correctly, can protect your locks, your tools, your hinges, and your equipment for decades, then somebody, somewhere, is losing money every single time you learn to do it yourself. Think about who profits when your metal fails. The company that sells you a new lock. The contractor who replaces your rusted out storm windows. The hardware store that sells you the same tool 3 times in 10 years. There is an entire economy built on the assumption that you will not know how to make things last. And the quiet genius of that little can, the reason it has survived since 1953 with the exact same secret formula, is that it threatens all of that. It was never patented, you know. The formula was kept as a trade secret precisely so nobody would ever have to publish what is inside. Think about that. Some of the most useful chemistry in your house, and you are not even allowed to know the recipe. And I want you to notice something about how we were taught to use it. The label, the ads, the whole picture in your head, all of it points you toward one thing. Squeaks, a squeaky hinge, a squeaky door. That is it. That is the box they put it in. Nobody ran commercials teaching you to winterize your tools with it, or to protect your emergency shutoffs, or to save a flooded generator. Why would they? There is no profit in teaching a man to make his belongings last forever. The profit is in the replacement. The profit is in you standing in the aisle of the hardware store every few years, buying the same thing again, shaking your head, and saying, they just do not make them like they used to. But they do. You just were never taught how to keep them. The Amish were never sold that story, so they never fell for it. They kept the old knowledge because nobody ever came along to make them forget it. I remember standing in a hardware store years ago, buying my 3rd set of the same pruning shears, genuinely believing that tools just wore out, that it was the natural order of things. It was not. My tools were dying of neglect, of moisture I never bothered to fight, and I was calling it wear and tear. That is the trick. They do not have to ban the knowledge, they just have to let you forget it and let the marketing quietly steer you somewhere else. The Amish never needed the recipe, they just needed the result. And they built entire habits around it while the rest of us forgot the can existed between squeaky doors. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. If your home was built before 1980, you have a hidden enemy that newer homes handle differently, and its name is moisture at the seams. Older houses breathe. They have single-pane windows, original hardware, real wood doors, metal window channels, and dozens of small metal fittings that were built to last a century, if and only if you keep water off of them. Most people let those parts corrode, then they rip them out and replace them with cheap, modern junk that will not last 20 years. You do not have to. Here is the technique, and you can do it this weekend with no permits, no contractor, and no permission from anybody. Take your can and go to every window in the house that sticks or squeaks. Those old metal window tracks in the sash hardware are full of grit and old moisture. Clean them out, wipe them dry, then lay a thin film into the track and work the window up and down. A window that has not moved smoothly in 20 years will glide like it did the day the house was built. And more important, you have just displaced the moisture that was slowly rusting the mechanism from the inside. Do the same with every exterior door hinge and every deadbolt. Do it with the metal parts of your storm doors. Do it with the garage door track and rollers, which is one of the single most expensive things to replace when it seizes up. An Amish farmer in Ohio told me something I never forgot. He said the English replaced what they could have preserved, and they call it progress. That stung, because he was right. I had thrown away more good metal in my life than most families ever owned. all because nobody taught me the difference between a spray and forget and a proper protective coat. There is one more spot in an older home that almost nobody thinks about, and it can save you from a genuine emergency. The moving parts of your electrical panel latch, your utility shutoffs, the manual valves for your water main. When those seize with corrosion and you need them in a hurry, in a flood, in a freeze, in a fire, you cannot move them. A twice-a-year wipe and coat, on the outside mechanism only, never on live parts, keeps those emergency shutoffs working the day your life depends on them. That is not a convenience. That is survival, and the old-timers understood survival in a way we have completely forgotten. Let me give you a few more that are made for older homes, because once you start looking, you find them everywhere. The old cast iron and steel radiator valves, if your home still has them, seize up and stop turning. A little worked into the valve stem, and they turn again. The mail slot flap, the old metal weather stripping along a threshold, the springs and hinges on a screen door that slams and squeaks all summer, the hardware on a wood window that has been painted shut for years, where a little penetrating oil worked around the metal helps free what the paint has locked, the chain and hinges on an attic pull-down ladder, which is a genuine safety issue when it seizes and you are standing on it. Every one of these is original hardware, built better than anything you can buy today, and every one of them can be saved instead of replaced. And here is the mindset shift that goes with all of it, because the technique is only half the lesson. In an older home, the default assumption of the modern world is that old means worn out. That is a lie that sells a lot of replacement parts. Old, in a house built before 1980, usually means built to last, if someone had only maintained it. Those single-pane windows, that solid core door, that heavy original hardware, was made to serve for 100 years. It was not the metal that failed, it was the maintenance that stopped. You can pick that maintenance back up this weekend for the price of a single can and undo decades of neglect in an afternoon. I have done it in my own home, room by room, and every time a 40-year-old window slides open, smooth and silent, I feel a little bit of that old craftsmanship come back to life under my hands. But here is where the story gets bigger than your house, because moisture is not only your enemy indoors. Let me tell you about the garden, because this is where the Amish really opened my eyes. Every gardener fights rust on their tools, and most people just accept it. The Amish did not. They kept a rag with a little of that oil on it hanging right by the shed door, and every single time a tool came back inside, it got a quick wipe before it was hung up. Not a project, not a chore. A habit that took 4 seconds, and because of it, their tools outlived them and got passed to their children. In a world where we throw out a shovel every few seasons, that is almost a radical act. Then there is the pest problem, and this is where it gets interesting, because that same can has a role most people never considered. Wasps. Every summer, folks get stung building nests under their eaves and around their porches. That water-displacing spray fouls the wings of wasps and drops them fast, and a thin coating sprayed up under the eaves and along the tops of door frames in early spring, before the nests are built, makes those surfaces slick and unwelcoming, so they do not want to build there in the first place. The old-timers always said prevention beats a fight, and with a nest of wasps over your front door, that wisdom is worth its weight in gold. Spray in the cool of early morning or dusk, when they are slow, and never stand directly underneath. That same slickness is why a thin line of it along the bottom of a metal trash can lid or around the base of a bird feeder pole stops ants and other crawling pests from marching up. They cannot get a grip. It is not poison. It is just physics. And physics does not care what the pest control company charges per visit. The Amish took that same thinking right out to the barn and the fence line, the metal hardware on a gate that lives out in the weather, the hinges and latches on the chicken coop, the moving parts of a hand pump at the well, the blade of a scythe or a sickle hung up for the season. All of it got the same treatment, because out on a working homestead, a seized tool is not an inconvenience, it is lost time and lost money in a life where every hour of daylight counts. I watched a man in his 80s swing open a barn door that had to be pushing 60 years old, and it moved like it was floating on air. He looked at me and he said, "We do not fix things out here, we keep them from breaking." That one sentence rearranged the way I think about owning anything. Keeping a thing from breaking is almost always cheaper, easier, and quieter than fixing it after it fails. We have simply forgotten how. But therefore, if the same principle stops rust, stops wasps, and stops ants, you have to start wondering how many other everyday problems have a simple answer that nobody bothered to tell you. Let me give you a few more quickly, because these are the ones people gasp at when they finally hear them. That squeal in your car door in the cold of winter, the one that makes your teeth hurt, is almost always the rubber weather stripping sticking and freezing to the metal frame. A thin wipe on the rubber gasket, not a soaking, keeps it from freezing to the frame and keeps the rubber from cracking in the cold. People pay for that at the shop. You can do it in your driveway in 2 minutes. Stuck zippers on winter coats and tents and sleeping bags, a tiny bit on a cloth, run along the teeth, and the zipper frees up instantly, and the moisture that was corroding the metal is driven out. Preppers who store gear for years swear by this, because a corroded zipper on a stored bag is a small disaster you discover at the worst possible time. Rusted, seized bolts that will not turn. This is the closest thing to the original 1953 purpose. That penetrating action creeps into the tiny gaps in corroded threads, breaks the bond of the rust, and lets a bolt turn that was frozen solid for years. Spray it, and here is the part everyone skips. Walk away and let it sit for 10 or 15 minutes before you try to turn it. The old-timers had patience. We do not, and that is why we strip bolts, and they did not. Sticky sliding doors and patio door tracks, squeaky bed frames and rocking chairs, corroded battery terminals in your car, cleaned and then given a thin protective coat to keep the corrosion from coming back. A shovel that clay and wet snow keep sticking to, given a thin coating so the dirt slides right off and the digging gets easier. Every one of these is a small victory, and every small victory is money that stays in your pocket instead of somebody else's. And I am not done, because the list the old-timers worked from is long, and every one of these is a repair you were probably about to pay somebody else to do. Squeaky sticking scissors and garden shears, where a drop worked into the pivot brings them back to life. The threads on a garden hose fitting that is seized to the spigot, freed with a little penetrating action instead of a hacksaw, the metal runners on a heavy dresser drawer that will not slide, the wheels on an office chair or a shop cart that have stopped rolling, the pull chain on an old ceiling fan or light, the hinge on a mailbox door that has rusted stiff, a stuck ring you cannot get off your finger, freed gently with a little on the skin, crayon, scuff marks and sticker residue lifted off a wall or a floor, tar and road grime that will not come off your car, squeaky windshield wiper arms, a padlock frozen with rust and ice that you sprayed and let sit until it finally clicked open in your hand. Every single one of those is a moment where the modern instinct is to give up, throw it out, or call somebody. And every single one of them was solved, quietly, for generations, with a can that cost less than a fast food lunch. That is not a coincidence. That is what happens when a product built to save missiles from moisture lands in the hands of people who actually understand what moisture does. The Amish did not memorize a list of 2,000 uses. They understood one principle, and the 2,000 uses fell out of it naturally. Control the water, everything follows. By now, you might be counting: rust protection on tools, winterizing equipment, locks and latches, window tracks, storm doors, garage rollers, emergency shutoffs, wasp prevention, ant barriers, car door gaskets, zippers, seized bolts, battery terminals, sliding doors, and more. Dozens of uses, all flowing from one single idea. Those three chemists locked into that formula in 1953. Push the water off, keep the water off. Everything else follows from that. But I promised you something at the very beginning. I promised you a trick pulled straight out of that original laboratory notebook, the very reason the product was born, and it is the one almost nobody uses, even though it is the most important of them all. So let me tell you the story of how I found it, because it matters. For years, I thought the greatest use of that can was rust prevention. I was wrong. The greatest use is the one written into its very name, and it was nearly forgotten. Remember what happened in 1961 when Hurricane Carla flooded the Gulf Coast? They did not send that truckload down to lubricate hinges. They sent it to bring drowned machines back to life. They sprayed it into soaked engines, wet ignitions, waterlogged electrical parts, and it pushed the water out and got dead equipment running again. That was the original purpose: water displacement. And it is the single most valuable thing that can do for a family that wants to be able to take care of itself when the systems fail. Here is the finale, and here is how you use it. Think about the machines your family would depend on if the power went out for a week, your backup generator, your well pump, the small engines on your emergency equipment. Every one of them has electrical contacts and metal parts that fail for one reason above all others: moisture. Damp gets into the connections, the points corrode, and the day you finally need that generator to start, it will not, because water beat you to it while the machine sat in the shed. The old approach, the one from that 1953 notebook, is this: when the machine is cold, off, and unplugged, never when it is running or live, you displace the moisture from those metal contacts and connections, dry them, and lay down a thin protective film that holds the water out through the whole damp season. You are doing exactly what they did to those flooded engines after Hurricane Carla, except you are doing it before the disaster instead of after. You are making sure that the one machine standing between your family and a cold, dark week actually starts when you pull the cord. I learned the value of this the hard way. I had a generator sit in a damp shed for 2 years. The one night I truly needed it, in an ice storm, it would not start. The contacts had corroded. I stood out there in the dark, furious at myself, because the answer had been sitting on my workbench the whole time in a blue and yellow can, and I never understood what it was actually for. The Amish family down the road never had that problem, because they treated moisture as the enemy every single season, not as a surprise. They preserved the knowledge that the rest of us threw away. They knew what those 3 chemists knew in 1953, and now you know it too. Let me tell you exactly how to do it, step by step, so you never stand in the dark the way I did. Pick a dry day in the fall, before the first hard freeze. Make sure the machine is completely off, cold, and disconnected from any power source and any fuel. Wipe down the exposed metal, the connections, the terminals, the exterior of the electrical contacts until they are clean and dry. Then displace the moisture with a light application and wipe away the excess so only a thin protective film remains. You are not soaking it, you are sealing it. Do the same to the pull cord mechanism, the exposed springs, the throttle linkage, any bare metal that faces the damp air. Then cover the machine and walk away knowing it will start on the day the lights go out. Do it once every fall. That is the whole ritual. That is the difference between a family that rides out a storm and a family that sits in the cold hoping. And here is the deeper reason. This is the finale. The reason it is worth more than every other hack combined. Every other use I gave you saves you money. This one can save you far more than that. When the power is out, when the water main is down, when the roads are closed and no help is coming, the machines that carry your family through are only as good as the maintenance you did months earlier. When the sun was shining and nothing was wrong, the Amish lived that truth every single day because they never had the safety net of the grid to fall back on in the first place. They cannot call the power company. So they learned generations ago to make absolutely certain that the things they depend on will work when they are needed. That is not paranoia, that is stewardship. That is the exact mindset that built this country, and it is the mindset that got quietly traded away for the convenience of paying somebody else to worry about it. That is the whole journey, a formula born to save a missile from rust, snuck out of a plant in a lunchbox by men who saw its real power, rushed to a hurricane to raise dead machines from floodwater, carried into space on the rocket that took John Glenn around the Earth, and quietly preserved all these years by plain families who never needed a laboratory to understand that if you control the water, you control the fate of everything metal you own. So here is what I want you to feel. Standing in your garage tonight, holding that can you have underestimated your entire life. You did not just find a few handy tricks. You recovered something that was taken from you. The knowledge that you can preserve what you own, protect what you depend on, and stop paying other people to replace the things you are perfectly capable of saving yourself. If you are the kind of person who believes that real, practical knowledge has been quietly pushed aside so that somebody else could keep selling you the same thing over and over, then you already know what to do next. Tell me one thing in the comments, and be specific, because this community only grows when people actually speak up. What is the one metal thing in your home, a lock, a tool, a hinge, a window, that you are going to protect this weekend now that you finally understand what that can was really built to do? Type it below. I read them and I answer. And if you want to keep recovering the knowledge that was quietly taken from families like ours, subscribe and stand with the people who are bringing it back, one forgotten skill at a time. Because in the next one, I am going to show you the Amish method for keeping a room warm through a brutal winter using almost no fuel at all, and the reason the old farmhouses stayed comfortable long after the fire went out. You will not believe how simple it is until you see it. I will be waiting for you there.